Well, hello, folks, and welcome to another week of Between Two Sundays. This is Mark Gladman, and right there, if you're watching on the screen with me and listening, he'll just appear as his voice comes in now, is Mark Beresford. Good evening, Mark.
G'day, Mark. How are you? How good to be here.
And you're back home now, right? You're not in Armidale now?
Yeah, no, I'm back home now, which is nice. We had that big trip last time to Armidale, but back home now in Gundaroo.
Gundaroo, good old Gundaroo.
Very, very good.
I've always loved the name of that place, ever since you moved
Best
there.
best little village in the world.
Nice. Well, as usual, folks, Between Two Sundays, where we talk about the lectionary readings, where we've been and where we're going. Last week was Advent 3. And our readings really circled around that idea of, we had a whole bunch of ideas in there, things like comforts and encouragement and all sorts of stuff in there. In terms of walking out of Sunday and into this week, now that it's Wednesday again, where have you been over the last couple of days, mate?
Yeah. Well, I've been really playing with this idea of so in 3:20 in the Zephaniah reading, the phrase is "I will bring you home," and I've been thinking of this in terms of the journey that we're on. That God is. This is what God is doing. God is leading us home.
Yeah.
And this has been kind of impacting the way I've gone about a lot of things. I've kind of said to myself, this might be a difficult task, but what God is doing here is bringing me home. And I've been thinking of salvation in these terms, of God bringing me home. I've been thinking a little bit about, you'll know a bit about the labyrinth, the practice of journey where we can't get lost, which I really love about the labyrinth, that it's not a maze that's trying to trick us or send us down the wrong way, but we can't get lost in a labyrinth. And so I've been thinking about that in terms of, because I saw this bringing you home phrase as really closely linked to salvation, closely linked to the repentance that sort of sits in that John reading. And I've just been finding confidence and peace in thinking, this is what God is doing.
That's good.
This is what God is doing in my life. And there are plenty of times, like for most people, I guess, I wonder what God is doing. And the thought that the big picture is God is really bringing me home, and God is home. And like a lot of modern theologians, I like the idea that earth is home as well, that heaven isn't a going away from here, but it's a healing of here. And we are ultimately created as earthlings, and we belong here. So I've been celebrating, I guess, and really finding a sense of peace in this idea that this is what God is doing. God is drawing me to God's heart more and more and more.
What an incredible way to think about it.
What did you do?
Well, I was going to say, just on yours first. I mean, to think, here you are in the midst of all this stuff that goes on in life, and things are good and things are bad and things are this and things are that. What's God doing? And I know we all ask that question. What the heck is God doing here? God's bringing you home. At the end of the day.
What a great answer. What just a terrific answer to that question. What is God doing? We ask it in a. I'm not trying to play down the fact that we ask that in a small, more immediate way most of the time, but I think I've been trying to ask it of myself in a bigger way.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And insisting that this is true, that this is what God is doing.
Yeah, that's so good.
Hmm.
So good.
Yeah.
I think for me, that whole idea of not letting the work of your hand, not letting your hands grow weak as you're doing that work, really stuck. And it got me really thinking about, well, what is the work? Well, the work comes down to, we talked about the work was preparing ourselves for joy, for peace, for a message of good news. And then, that whole idea of the exhortations, the parakleo, that comfort, the encouragement, that consolation. And it made me start to think about, well, what am I carrying? How am I? Do I put this? What do I carry with me as I enter a room, as I enter space with other people, as I live around others? Am I carrying joy? Am I carrying peace? Is my life speaking of comfort and encouragement and consolation? Do I come bearing good news? And I'm not talking about being evangelistic and preaching in the middle of a room, but what sort of air am I carrying? I know when I was doing stand-up, I used to say, Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and life with abundance. But the way a lot of Christians look, you would have thought that Jesus said, I've come that you might have lemons, and lemons in abundance. And it's, do I look like I'm carrying these beautiful things? Do I look like a bearer of good news? I guess I've been thinking, because that's what we are. That's part about the work of our hands. With joy, we're drawing water. There's, joy always, peace around us. The exhortation that makes people go, what do I do? This is amazing. This is excellent. I want in on this. What do I do to get in on this? Do I carry that? That's been a great question. In terms of how I live, particularly being a chaplain in a school where I'm mixing with people all day long who are looking at me knowing that Les the God guy. Being a Christian school, an Anglican school, that people have that expectation, but still there's a lot of people there who don't understand that, who don't know what that means. And I wonder if they went off how I lived around them today, what would they be thinking of God? So I guess that's really been a huge question that I've been carrying since our last conversation. Walking forward.
What a wonderful question to be carrying, Mark. And I love the idea that as Christians we would embrace the permission to be gracious. So often I think we think there's some obligation for us to be judgmental or right and cause other people to look wrong. What if this idea of I'm trying to represent this God really sank in, and we embraced the permission that gives to be merciful and gracious? I had an opportunity this week where, I think we had a situation where I think we could have been very judgmental as a church, and there's a deep sense of permission in me for us to be gracious. And in the end, that's where my arguments pushed the team. And I felt good about that. I know there's dangers in that. I'm sure it's able to be abused and all of that kind of thing. But there's something in me that, as a follower of Jesus, says, if I'm going to err somewhere, I'm going to err on the side of grace.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with that, because I know I can't see everything. I know it's not that I can get everything perfectly right. The truth is I will err somewhere. And I'm choosing to err on the side of grace because I believe with all my heart that God errs on the side of grace for me.
Yeah.
And therefore I almost feel a responsibility to try and bring a gracious aura with me wherever I can.
Well, let's take it a step further. If we are stamped with the image of God, and that the Spirit of Christ dwells in us, and we truly believe that, then what else are we meant to do?
Yes.
I don't
What,
think
what a
it
magnificent
can truly be any other
permission that
way.
is. Yeah, it's a tremendous permission for us to be
Yeah.
gracious people. And I think we get scared that might mean we're gullible or mean we lose out. I wonder if the death and resurrection of Jesus tells us that plainly. That in a world that's not gracious, there are dangers in living graciously. Maybe we need to embrace those dangers rather than flee from them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
There's been a lot in these readings, and this week is no exception. We are in the last Sunday of Advent. We're heading towards the last Sunday of Advent now. And the readings are from Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through to 5a, Psalm 80, verses 1 to 7, Hebrews 10, verses 5 to 10, and Luke 1, verses 39 to 55. The readings are in the show notes for the podcast and in the notes on the video explanation, and do show on the, we'll be showing on the Wednesday leading up to Advent 4 in the Instagram page, and obviously we'll be in Mark's articles this week as we head there.
Yes.
So Advent 4, there's some pretty heavy stuff in here this week, but I don't know, I get the sense that it's quite beautiful from my end. What did you find, mate?
Well, I guess firstly, I was from the Micah reading, I was kind of left celebrating this God that chooses the little things, which I just see everywhere nowadays as I read about God.
Yeah.
As I read the Bible, just celebrating this God that doesn't look for the big fancy expert, not necessarily targeting the well-educated, but God who looks at the little one. And this little clan of Judah is just another example of God being so inherently different to us. We seem to be always looking up to look for something, for the one who's bigger or the next step forward. Yet God just seems to wonderfully notice the little things. I guess I'm probably always going to see this when it's there in Scripture, because my favourite parable by a long way is the parable of the mustard seed.
Right.
I just think it's this is such an upside down world, telling us to do little things and that God will do so much more than we can imagine with them. And I think this promise that God will use Judah, and this pointing out that it's the little clan, kind of got me thinking a little bit around the nature of the kingdom that we are learning from.
Yeah.
That's just a start. What did you see?
It's just the start. Well, in terms of Micah, if we're going to take it bit by bit, do it a little bit different this week, I'm happy to do that. Micah's an interesting one. In verse 3 there it says, therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought them forth. And then you read on a little bit and you see that the labor that's brought forth, what does it bring forth? It brings forth feeding, it brings forth security and strength of God around them. And it's kind of like there's this idea that what we're doing is not in vain. What we're doing is we're going back to the little things, the little things that we're doing to build this little kingdom. They're actually making significant difference. It might be just one guy we've given a sandwich to, or one family that we helped move house, or whatever it happens to be, but it's actually celebrated as a small thing, but in kingdom terms, there is no such thing as a small thing. There are just things. If that's a better way to put it. And so there's this beautiful idea of the small things, which jumping a little bit ahead, but I'll pause in a second so we can talk about the psalm. But when we get to Luke, I mean, to me, the small thing's Mary.
Absolutely.
This teenage girl in the back blocks of Israel somewhere, getting ready to marry.
And again, God just choosing where the world wouldn't. God looking where the world is not looking, a completely different direction. I wonder if that gives us permission to learn to be like this, and to really allow that to settle in our soul, that we are invited to look the other way, or in a different direction to really what the world is calling us to look. And Mary is the classic on this, isn't she? And even her song is so filled with the upside down nature of God's behavior. He's kept his promise, and he's noticed the little people, and he's rejected the rich and the powerful. And God is just so unlike us. And I've got to say, what a relief. What a relief that God is so unlike us.
You read Mary's story and you speak it out for what it is. How on earth did the church for so long, and in some places still does, look down their noses at people who are in Mary's position, unwed teenage mums?
Yes.
How do you get to that place when God chose? He didn't pick a married noble person. He picked an unwed teenage woman and said, let's have the baby born through her. Why? Because God chooses. Why would we, let that go?
This is what God is like.
That's right. We'll come back to Mary in a second, if you like. Let's
sure.
Have a look at this psalm. There were two phrases in the psalm that stuck out to me. And I'm the patterns guy, so you can probably see what it is already. Verse 3, verse 7, restore us.
We all like patterns, yes.
There's this sense of restoration that's happening through the readings this week, even in terms of, the labor that's bringing forth the feeding and the watering and the security. That's a restoration. God restoring this little place called Judah, God restoring the singer of the psalm. Even in Hebrews, God restoring without the need for the guilt that comes with having given or not given an offering. And in Mary, all the bits you were just quoting, which, like we said, we'll come back to in a minute, but scattered the proud, brings down the powerful, lifted up the lowly. There's a restoration of those who are small, like Judah. It's a beautiful sense of, again, what God is doing in and among us while we have this now but not yet kingdom sort of going on and being built and created around us.
Yes. The God who is restoring in the now but not yet is what a wonderful, two beautiful pictures to bring together for Advent, I think. What is God doing? God is restoring. Where are we in the story? We're in the middle. We can't, we're not at the end where we're looking back and everything is finished, but we're more in the middle, which is that, as we've already said, that is Advent. I think the encouragement to recognize that there is more to come, that God is still at work and still working in these wonderful directions that we see these passages pointing, these directions of, working with the small, these directions of restoration, these directions of working with someone like Mary rather than picking the powerful queen or whatever. This is should be such an encouraging thing for those of us who aren't the pinnacles of power in our world. That God is actually working alongside us. How tempted we are to sort of look to the powerful and influential, but there's just this inherent repeated encouragement to look the other way here, I think.
There was a line in that psalm for me among all that made me look twice, and I don't know if I'm even reading in this in the way that it's meant to be read, but the beauty of scripture.
Poetry.
Verse 5, you have fed them with the bread of tears and given them tears to drink in full measure. You could read that as saying, your people, like the verse before that says, how long will you be angry with your people's prayers? There's this, you could read it with the sense of, God, why are you making these people cry?
Yes.
Or the way I've seen it, with that sense of restoration, that it's through the tears that these people have been crying as they've been praying and crying out to God. It's asking where God is. That question before, where is God? That those tears have been bread, and those tears have been drink. Just like, again, that idea of the cloud and in the desert, God has provided food and drink for those that are wandering, for those that are lost, for those that are in the dry land. They haven't gone hungry. Sure, it's been their tears, but God has used their tears in a way that is restoring them. And this is obviously not a physical sense, so spiritually, emotionally, psychologically even, there's something powerful about crying and about letting our emotions come forward in tears. I wrote a post on this a couple of weeks ago, where, we cry when we laugh, we cry when we're sad, we cry when we're angry. Tears are such a powerful thing that can come out with any expression of emotion. And God uses them to feed us and to water us. It just gave me that sense of God is looking after our restoration, and that we shouldn't take anything, again, as we were saying before, that not everything has to be taken as a negative. We can see it as a positive way to grow and be built and directed where God wants to take us.
I wonder if this reading of Psalm 80, verses 1 to 7, can be an encouragement to those who are in a season of tears, because this is a prayer. This is not rushing to the end. It's not rushing to restoration. It's actually a prayer for restoration. Even by the time we get to verse 7, it's still a prayer. Restore us, O God of hosts. Let your face shine that we may be saved.
Yeah,
this is powerful stuff because it's in the middle of a story. Clearly, there's sorrow or lament or loss here, whatever it is. And this is a turning to God in that, rather than turning to God when it's all fixed, or not bothering to turn to God because we're in the middle of this challenge or sorrow or loss. This is a turning to God with everything that's going on. I think this is for me the very essence of the Psalms. That the psalmists, with the myriad of emotions and experiences that are represented in these 150 songs that we have, all of them are turning to God. They're turning to God within these things, not because they're gone or because I'm happy I'm turning to God. David in Psalm 50 turns to God because he's done the wrong thing. Here we have people turning to God because they're in the midst of hell. This is this extraordinary invitation, and this is what the Psalms that do for me, this extraordinary invitation to turn to God at every moment, in every crisis and in every joy, in every celebration, in every fear. Turn to God after every failing on our part. There's just a song for all of these things. And this is such a wonderful invitation for us to live all of life before God, not just the good and pretty bits. it's kind of a little bit of a pet peeve I have, I think, with worship in a lot of our churches, that, you know, people come in, we better get them, you know, we got to get a nice upbeat song that'll make everyone feel good. And a lot of our worship, not all of it to be fair, but a lot of our worship is very oriented towards making us feel good. I don't know that the Psalms do this. I don't know that they're always like this. There's Psalms like this one that at least by the time we get to verse 7 feel very unresolved still.
Yeah.
And what if that reality is something we can bring to God? And these Psalms insist that we can bring to God.
Well, I mean, both you and I know how difficult it is to preach Job, how difficult it is to preach Lamentations, how difficult it is to preach Jeremiah, because as a community, we quite often don't know how to deal with those things. And I heard a great quote. I don't know if I've shared it here in a previous podcast or whether it's something, I know I've said it a couple of times on my Monk and Docs posts at Instagram. But Father Frederick Schmidt, who is a Episcopal priest and scholar in the United States, he did an article recently on Job, and towards the end of it, he said, Job, like the Gospels, is not about rescuing us from a difficult situation. It's about helping us walk through it. That's not the exact phrase. I'm gonna have to find it now so I can tell you.
That's pretty good. Pretty good.
But that's the reality. It's not this. Yeah. It's not this. What do you call them? A TV evangelist type. Prosperity theology. This is the reality of what's going on, and I found it. It's right here. The message of Job is like the message of the gospel. It's very different. It is a way of life in a troubled world, not a way out of trouble. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And that's what you're saying exactly here about this psalm. Here, there's these people in this issue. We might sit there and be, the naysayers, and some people who are anti-Christianity or anti-religion might say, well, where is the God? Why isn't God rescuing them? Because God, I don't think there's ever a place in Scripture where God grabs people and goes, I'll pull you out of there. I don't think that's correct me if I'm wrong, but even if you want to take the story of Noah as being literal, that's a long story. I know we fit it into a couple of chapters of Genesis, but this is not something that happened in 20 minutes. This is something that happened over a period of a couple of months, like at least a quarter of a year. This is a long time coming when stuff's happening on the ground. And so this idea that God just rips people out of stuff, that's vending machine theology. That's put the coin in and what you want comes out theology. The reality is that God meets us where we are and walks with us through it. I think if we get our understanding of God a bit more focused on the fact that this is the God we worship, not a God who sits in the sky and snaps fingers and moves chess pieces, but a God who is there in the midst with us, present with us, as we were saying just a moment ago, meeting us where we are, walking with us and feeding us. And, my God, you're here with me. Even in the midst, why have you forsaken me? And God said, I haven't, I'm here. It's all right. But why do I hurt? Because I hurt too. It's a very
This is the God who is in the suffering, the God who is found in our suffering. Where is God when it hurts? God is with us and beside us. God is feeling this, not just in the vicinity, but God is actually involved in this pain and working towards a time when all will be restored, when all will be made well. So God is involved in this. If there's anything the death and resurrection of Jesus tells us, it's that God is involved and moved by the suffering of the world. And I think, again, this is so upside down. We find it almost impossible to get our head around this when we're in the midst of something difficult. We always seem to want to pray that God will reach down, pluck us out. But maybe the image is much more, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace, and they're in there protected with a fourth one that looked like the Son of God next to them in the furnace. I think that's the image that's the image that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection actually should draw out of us, rather than this image of the God who puts the fire out, or the God who never lets them go in. Actually, they do go in, but there is one next to them in that scenario. And I find that I'm not the first by a long shot to find that a very compelling story about the nature of the way God suffers alongside us.
I think maybe this is why, and it's only just dawned on me why I've always been troubled by that thing you hear about, between Malachi or Maccabees, depending on where you want to take it from, to Jesus, is this silent of, we hear nothing for 400 years. God was there. It's not like God disappeared from the planet for 400 years. God was there. And we miss that. Maybe there was maybe a period of time where people missed God. People didn't see where God was. I mean, there were certainly people worshiping God all through that time. That's a given.
Of course.
Yeah. So Hebrews.
Yes.
What did you draw out of Hebrews? There's so much in this, folks. This is a really good set of readings this Sunday. I had throwbacks to both Micah and Hosea in that in verse 8 there, Hebrews 10:8, where the writer of Hebrews writes, "You have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sin offerings." This is something that the prophets were even saying, or God was saying through the prophets. Well, what do you burn offerings for me for? I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. It doesn't bug me. That's not what I need. What I want, if you look back in verse 5, sacrifices and offerings you have not desired, but a body you have prepared for me. And symbolically, it's interesting that in the gospel reading, again, we get Mary. We get somebody who's literally offering her body to God, literally. Not to be burned, not to be, cut up and dismembered and laid in two bits and walk between and everything else, but somebody who's literally sacrificing their body for a period of time for God to allow the Christ to become incarnate. It was, I think, it's interesting, isn't it, when the lectionary puts these passages side by side, what it is that we see emerge. And for me, that was certainly a standout for the Hebrews passage.
There is wisdom in the lectionary writers, isn't there?
Yeah.
They have moments where they do things very, very, very well. Again, in this Hebrews passage, I find myself thinking, what a different God to us we worship. If the Pharisees and Sadducees and the religious leaders of Jesus' time tell us anything, it's that, and the city of Jerusalem and the temple, if these things tell us anything, they tell us that there was a time when the religious world centered made sacrifice and offering to God absolutely central. This was more central than the other things that the law discussed, including love of God and love of neighbor. So this was the priority, and thousands upon thousands of priests gave their life shift after shift after shift to this continual offering of sacrifices to God. And yet here we have a story that's insisting that God offered himself. God offered God's self to us. This is such a turning over of the tables, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is really a flipping of everything we've ever imagined on its head, that God needs something from us. Actually, no, you need something from God. And God's heart is willing to give of God for us. This is, it's such a different way of thinking. And then I think, as we read Mary, we find this extension of this almost, where we are urged to imitate this God who lives for others, who lives and dies for others, who gives of themselves for others. And Mary, sadly, in my tradition, the traditions I've grown up in, we've played her down in a reaction to scenarios where people have made more of her than perhaps the scriptures do. But gee, she's a hero. She is the first one to get this. Really, she is the first one to get this, and so humble about it. And it's this humble heart that's actually showing us God's heart.
Yeah.
Imitating God's heart. And that is, look, again, this is such an upside down story for us, or it insists that we've got everything upside down, and God is showing us a completely different way. I tell you what, I find it extraordinarily easy to worship the God who is not asking for my sacrifices and offerings, but is sacrificing, giving of God's self first, so that I might learn to do that. I might learn to imitate the one in whose image I am formed.
Yeah.
This heart is actually what we are created for. And we're the ones who've kind of perverted that and said, no, I'm created for myself. Actually, if God gives of God's self like this, we find ourselves as we give of ourselves like this as well. And this is where I think Mary's joy and her song comes from. The fact that she's being herself.
Yeah.
The closer she gets to reflecting this heart of God, the more she is herself. And I think that's wonderful.
There are a number of mystics who would agree with you on that on so many levels. That the closer we get to the heart of God, the more ourselves we become. It's very, very true.
Yes.
And you're right, she gets it.
I am convinced that's right. Yeah.
This
is the story of God. This is the story of God.
Yeah.
God, this is the story of salvation, that we would come back to the heart that created us in that one's image.
And
so
it's interesting
when this one comes into our world and gives rather than takes, we are only seeing what we were created to be.
All these four passages tie that together, which is where I went. Bear with me for a second. So,
I'm liking that.
She likes it. I mean, she gets it. I mean, she probably likes it too, but she gets it. She, scatters the proud, brings down the powerful, lifts up the lowly, filled the hungry with good things, sent the rich away empty, has helped his servant Israel, remembers mercy. I mean, this is what Mary knows is going to happen through the declarations that are going to come and the way of life that's going to come through this baby that she's carrying. And it's interesting, we talked about restoration in Micah, and we talked about restoration in the Psalm, and then we talked about in the passage in Hebrews, God saying, well, I don't want your sacrifice. What does God want? When we go back to the likes of Micah and Hosea, we see God saying, what I don't want, or what I don't want you to sacrifice. What I want is I want you to obey me. I want you to love me. I want you to keep my commandments. And what's that? Well, Jesus said it quite frankly. All the law and the prophets hinges on two things: love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. What does that look like? Bringing down the powerful, scattering the proud, lifting up the lowly, filling the hungry with good things, sending the rich away empty. What we literally see here is in these four readings, there's a restoration coming. What is it being restored for? It's being restored to do the very thing that God wants us to do, not to sacrifice something, but to do the things that equate to showing justice and mercy, rivers of justice, rivers of mercy. Right there. It's right there in the Magnificat, which is a Benedictine. I mean, we sing this every night for Vespers. This is the Vesper hymn. And there's something incredibly powerful about the very last Sunday of Advent. You know, this week we'll be celebrating Christmas, and this is the last, at least this year, this is the last reflection, gospel reflection before Christmas comes. If there was anything that encapsulated what that baby laying in a food trough where the animals are kept encapsulates, this is it. This is it. And think about that whole story. I mean, it's interesting. At our school, the students rewrote the nativity for an Australian setting, and it was really interesting. We didn't give them any instruction, as far as I'm aware. Our senior, our school priest may have, but they had the three wise men as three tradies who turned up in their ute. The shepherds were Micah's workers. And I sat there watching this and I went, my goodness, they get it. They get it. It wasn't the rich and the famous who were the first people who were invited to come and see this child. It was the Micah's workers. It was the tradies who most people in the church would go, Micah's workers, well, they're poor and insignificant, really. Yep. And tradies, well, do they really even understand what we're doing in here? Nope, but that's why they're welcome. I thought these kids get it. This is senior students, and I'm thinking, man, I couldn't be more proud of the students who wrote that. And that's what these four passages really come along with that, don't they? I'm restoring you, but not so that you can bigwig it. I'm restoring you so that you can scatter the proud, bring the powerful down, lift up the lowly, fill the hungry with good things. That's what it is. And that's the sacrifice I ask of you. That's what I'm asking you, to show justice, rivers of justice, mercy, walking humbly. That's where it is.
Wow. And all pointing us to the incarnation of God, to God amongst us as a child, the vulnerability of that, the humility of that.
Absolutely.
If our imagining of God coming among us would be so different, wouldn't it?
It would.
If God's going to turn up, it's going to be a firestorm. But this is so humble, really completely unnoticed, almost completely unnoticed, apart from heaven and shepherds and some wise men who were there later.
Yeah.
But really, it's a strange. It's a strange welcome into the world. It's not. Again, it's anything but the way we would do it.
That's right.
It's got to be telling us that this kingdom, this guy is going to proclaim when he grows up, is different. This is going to be different to the kingdoms we're used to.
Yeah. Well, there it is, Advent 4. Don't forget, you can check out the articles at Mark's blog, barefootfollower.life. You can see all through this week the daily posts at Instagram, which is at Between Two Sundays. And please make sure that if you come over there, leave a direct message, make a comment on the posts. I don't put the posts up there just to sit there nice We really do want your feedback. And we've now, or have for a couple of weeks now, had the podcast as a vodcast. So it's simply what you're seeing here is just us talking. But we figured some people might want to watch it on YouTube. So it's been there, and there's obviously plenty of scope within YouTube to make comments. And we invite you to do that, and to, we'd love to dialogue with you on these readings and what it is that you're doing with them as Sunday approaches. And of course, this week is Christmas. And so we need to say to you all, may God bless you and be with you as you celebrate the feast of Christmas this coming week. So there, anything else you want to add before we finish up, my friend?
Just that this is actually a really significant week. Christmas is, one of the two festivals that are really celebrated right across the church. I know there are some exceptions to that, but they are few and far between. But Christmas and Easter, these are two pinnacles of the story we are learning to live by. And that God took on flesh and dwelt among us is the most extraordinary story. And I hope it's more than a day off. I hope it is the story that kind of reshapes your imagination of what God is doing in our world. The incarnation and the fact that this incarnated God, this enfleshed God, suffered, died, and rose again. The two pillars of our story, really. So I hope you find appropriate ways to celebrate that extraordinary story this week.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for being with us, folks. Thanks, Mark. As always, my good friend.
Thank you.
It's always good to chat. And obviously, this isn't the end of the road just because Christmas is coming this week. We'll be with you next week for the first Sunday after Christmas. We'll be continuing to talk between two Sundays. So until then, God bless you. Be at peace. Grace, peace, and love be with you, friends. And we'll have a Merry Christmas. Bye for now.